It started the morning I came back from maternity leave. The hallway smelled exactly the same: faint coffee, printer ink, and the air conditioning that never knew when to stop. My badge still opened the glass door. My desk was still in the same corner, the monitor at the same angle, the chair still creaked when I sat down. Everything looked identical, and yet it all felt slightly out of focus, like I was walking through a perfect copy of a life I used to have. My name is Mara. I'm 38, and I've spent 11 years in this company as a marketing strategist, long enough to see 3 rebrands, 5 bosses, and 2 office renovations. I built campaigns from scratch, wrote the numbers that made them proud, and trained new hires who now talk like experts. I knew every rhythm of this place, from the way the lights flickered at 7:45 a.m. to the sound of the coffee machine that never got serviced on Fridays. And yet that morning, when I looked at my door, I froze. My nameplate was there, polished and neat, but my title had changed. Associate Marketing Lead. 6 months ago, it said Strategy Manager. The font was smaller, too. I stood there for a full minute, one hand holding the cooler bag with 2 milk bottles inside, the other tracing each letter like I could somehow rub the old title back into place. Someone from HR walked past, smiled politely, and said, "Welcome back. We made a few little adjustments while you were away. Nothing major." I nodded, but my chest tightened. Adjustments. In corporate language, that usually means a quiet demotion dressed up as efficiency. My computer greeted me with the same desktop wallpaper, a picture of my newborn son gripping my finger. I had taken it the day before I gave birth, and back then I thought it would make me feel balanced to see it when I returned. Now it just made me feel watched, like every email, every sigh, every minute I spent pumping milk would silently confirm what they already assumed, that I couldn't be the same person anymore. My inbox had 1,742 unread messages. I scrolled through, noticing threads I used to lead now signed off by someone else. Campaigns I had created were renamed, presentations restructured. Even the folder titles felt rewritten, as if my contribution had been cleaned out of the system. My new supervisor, Matthew, stopped by around 10. He used to be my intern 3 years ago. He smiled, nervous, and said, "Welcome back, Mara. We've got a lighter workload for you this quarter. Thought it might help you transition." Transition. The word hit me like a whisper through glass. It wasn't about kindness. It was about containment. I thanked him, because that's what women do in offices like this. We thank people for taking space away as if they're giving it back. The rest of the morning passed in fragments: small talk, new faces, a new break room layout. People glanced at the milk cooler by my desk and smiled in that gentle, careful way reserved for new mothers and retirees. No one asked about the projects I left unfinished. No one mentioned the campaign that had made us hit record numbers right before my leave. At lunch, I sat by the window, pretending to check emails while watching the others. They laughed loudly, moved in clusters, their energy sharp and effortless. I could feel myself becoming background, the quiet, polite version of the woman I used to be. The office had moved on, and I was expected to fit back in like nothing had happened. When I returned to my desk, a small welcome card waited for me. "We missed you, Mara," it said, in 3 different handwriting styles. I smiled at it. Not because it was kind, but because it was exactly the kind of gesture offices use to cover discomfort. I placed it beside my monitor, next to the little milk bottle I'd forgotten to put away. The sunlight hit the glass, and for a second it looked like it was glowing, fragile but unbroken. I leaned back, letting the hum of the office fill the silence. In the reflection of my screen, I could see both my face and the downgraded title behind me. They didn't match. One told me I was less. The other reminded me I wasn't. The truth settled slowly, like dust. This wasn't an accident. It was systemic courtesy, the kind that politely erases women the moment they choose to have a child. They didn't need to say it. They just needed to change the font size. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked like a pulse. I typed the date, first day back. Then, without meaning to, I started writing everything I noticed. Who had taken which project, which files were renamed, what words people used around me. Not out of anger, out of instinct. Documentation had always been my quiet way of surviving. I looked at the milk bottle again. Its lid was still cool to the touch. It reminded me of what 6 months had really taught me: endurance, patience, and precision. Maybe that was the irony no one saw. Motherhood doesn't weaken focus. It sharpens it. And as the clock hit noon, I closed the document, labeled it simply Day 1, because I already knew this wasn't my return. It was the start of a new experiment, to see how long it would take for fairness to remember my name. By the end of my first week back, I had learned the new rhythm of exclusion. It was quiet, almost polite. Meetings I used to lead now appeared on my calendar as optional. Reports I once signed off on now came to me for review. Even my desk felt slightly smaller, as if space itself had decided I should occupy less of it. Every morning, the same subtle choreography played out: a nod from the new team lead, a smile from HR, a gentle reminder that I could ease back in at my own pace. They said it like a kindness, but it sounded like a verdict. The thing about bias in offices like ours is that it never announces itself. It seeps in through well-intentioned words. "You must be so busy with the baby. Don't stress about late meetings. We know you have your hands full. We'll handle the tough clients for now. You've earned some rest." Rest. I didn't need rest. I needed responsibility. I needed to prove that I hadn't lost the sharpness that used to make people lower their voices when I entered a room. One afternoon, while refilling my coffee, I overheard 2 analysts whispering near the break room. "She's good," one said softly. "But it's hard for moms to keep up with campaign cycles." They said it with empathy, as if they were defending me. I smiled to myself and stirred the coffee, one slow circle at a time. That was the moment I understood. They didn't mean to minimize me. They just couldn't imagine me the same anymore. The subtle shift followed me everywhere. I was still invited to brainstorming sessions, but my ideas came back rewritten. I'd suggest a concept, and 10 minutes later someone else would rephrase it, louder, and get credit. I didn't correct them, not yet. I just noted who said what, when, and how the room reacted. The list grew longer every week. One morning, I walked into a client presentation I had once led every quarter. Matthew stood at the front of the room, crisp suit, confident tone, presenting the new strategic model. Slide 3 made my throat tighten. It was the exact diagram I had drawn a year ago, right down to the same typo in the subheading. He called it his framework. No one questioned it. I watched silently, one hand resting on my notebook, the other tracing the edge of the milk bottle that had become a small ritual on my desk. It wasn't anger that filled me, just a heavy, quiet clarity. That evening, I went through the old shared folders again. The timestamp on my original file was still there, dated October 3rd, 2:17 a.m., 2 weeks after my son was born. The night I couldn't sleep and decided to keep my mind busy with numbers instead of lullabies. I stared at the file name, Growth Framework Draft, same as the slide Matthew had presented. I took a screenshot. Not for revenge, for accuracy. Over the next few weeks, the imbalance deepened. I began to notice who was copied on which emails, who received praise, who didn't. The new hires came to me for guidance, whispering questions about metrics they didn't understand. But in meetings, they credited Matthew for the solutions I'd quietly given them. And Matthew, well, he was learning fast how to lead by proxy. I started keeping a document called Patterns. It wasn't labeled that way on my desktop, of course. The folder was named Administrative Notes, Q2, which in corporate terms is invisible enough to be left alone. Every line in that file was a pattern: a date, a comment, a shift in tone, a missing acknowledgement. 11 pages by the end of April. By May, 19. HR checked in twice, their tone perfectly neutral. "How's the transition going?" I said it was fine. That's what you say when you're documenting. You never break the rhythm. You just collect. There were moments I almost forgot to breathe. During one team lunch, someone joked that parenthood changes priorities, and asked me if I planned to stay in leadership mode or maybe focus on balance now. I smiled and said balance sounded lovely. But in my mind, I was counting the number of times women had been told to pick between competence and care. That count hit 37 by the end of the quarter. The night before our quarterly audit, I stayed late. The office was dark except for the blue glow of monitors and the hum of the air conditioning. My reflection in the glass looked like a ghost of someone who used to be taken seriously. I watched the city lights blur in the distance and thought about how many women before me had sat in similar offices, biting their tongues, waiting for fairness to catch up. I opened the patterns document again and read through the notes. No emotion, just data. If there's one thing motherhood teaches you, it's the discipline of timing. When to act, when to wait, when to stay absolutely still. That night, I realized something that steadied me. I didn't need to shout to reclaim space. I just needed the right moment and proof. And I already had both. When I finally shut down my computer, the screen reflected the milk bottle sitting beside it, half empty, light glinting off its curve like a small beacon. I smiled quietly. Some women wear armor. Mine was patience disguised as routine. As I walked out of the office, I passed the framed company values hanging near the elevator. Integrity, ownership, respect. 3 words that suddenly felt like a riddle. I pressed the elevator button and whispered under my breath, "Let's see if they still mean something." It happened on a Thursday morning. The kind of morning that feels harmless. Soft light, calm air, the illusion that things might finally be okay. I had just finished drafting the monthly performance report when a meeting reminder popped up on my screen. Q2 Growth Review, Conference Room B. I hadn't been invited, but I had created that deck last year. So out of habit, I clicked open the shared slides. The title page made my chest tighten. It said the Mara Framework, revised by MM. My initials, followed by his. I stared at it for a full 30 seconds before the absurdity landed. My name was still there, but now it was being used to credit someone else. I walked to the glass conference room and stopped at the edge, unseen but close enough to hear. Matthew was standing at the front, his voice confident, clean, rehearsed. On the screen behind him, my old structure appeared. The same flowchart I had drawn on a whiteboard a year ago, the one that had saved the company 23% in campaign costs. I watched him move through it slide by slide, renaming every element, calling it our new adaptive model. I could have interrupted. I could have stepped inside and said, "That's mine." But I didn't. I stood there behind the glass, notebook in hand, taking notes like I was an observer at my own erasure. There were 7 people in that room, including HR and our director. None of them looked surprised. They nodded, took notes, smiled politely when he cracked jokes. He was selling my work with the comfort of someone who knew I wouldn't stop him. At one point, he gestured toward a metric on slide 17, the slide I had stayed up until 2:17 a.m. fine-tuning, the night my baby wouldn't sleep. This projection, he said, was the turning point for our Q4 efficiency. I exhaled quietly, my breath fogging the glass just enough to blur the line between me and the room. I wrote in my notebook, slide 17, timestamp 2:17 a.m., October 3rd. Source, personal draft. No anger, no shock. Just precision. The same instinct that used to make me a good strategist. The meeting ended with applause. Matthew walked out smiling, talking loudly about new opportunities. He didn't see me. I didn't say anything. I walked back to my desk, opened the shared drive, and downloaded the full presentation. The metadata still listed me as the original creator. I took a screenshot, saved it in the patterns folder. Then another. And another. Later that afternoon, HR sent an email congratulating Matthew for his leadership initiative. My name wasn't mentioned. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed one of the screenshots, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the notebook I carried everywhere. The same notebook I'd used before maternity leave, still marked by faint coffee stains and the edge of an old hospital band I'd used as a bookmark. That evening, as the office emptied, I sat in silence, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me steady and cold. The milk bottle beside my laptop caught the light, half full, its reflection a small, distorted version of me. I whispered, "They really think silence means surrender." But I knew better. Silence is data. Silence is strategy. Over the next few days, the story spread. Not the real story, but the polished version. Matthew had streamlined a legacy model and refined outdated processes. People congratulated him. He gave interviews to internal newsletters, using phrases I had written word for word in my old drafts. My inbox filled with automated notifications about his project milestones. Each one was a copy of my own past work. I didn't delete a single one. Every email, every attached file, every congratulations was a breadcrumb. And I followed them quietly. One afternoon during a team sync, Matthew presented the upcoming strategy. He said, "We'll focus on sustainable pacing this time, not burnout cycles." The words made me pause. They were mine, lifted directly from my notes after the Q1 burnout report I had authored last year. I smiled faintly. Sustainable pacing. The irony was sharp. After the meeting, he stopped by my desk. "Hey, Mara, thanks again for helping during transition. I know it's been an adjustment for you." His tone was friendly, practiced. I nodded and said, "It's been enlightening." He smiled, not hearing the layers in that word. That night, when I tucked my son into bed, I caught my reflection in the nursery window. Same steady eyes, same quiet focus. The thought came uninvited. They don't know who they're underestimating. Back at my desk, I reopened the patterns file. Page 21. I wrote, "Credit reassignment complete. Emotional neutrality maintained. Prepare next step, visibility test." Then I added one more line. "Slide 17 remains proof of authorship." I saved the file, closed the laptop, and sat for a long time in the dark. The milk bottle was empty now, standing like a small monument to what patience can become when cornered. I traced its rim with my finger and thought, if they've rewritten my story, I'll just make sure the audit reads the truth. Somewhere between that thought and the quiet hum of the fridge, I realized this was the moment every woman faces in her own version of this story. The point where endurance meets strategy. Not the explosion. The calibration. I smiled faintly, because I finally understood. The most dangerous kind of anger is the one that's organized. The weekend after the meeting, I did something I hadn't done in years. I printed everything. Every deck, every email chain, every timestamp with my name on it. I sat at my kitchen table while my son slept in the next room, surrounded by stacks of paper that smelled faintly of toner and late nights. It felt less like work, more like excavation, uncovering proof that I had existed inside the system before someone quietly rewrote me out of it. Sunday night, I labeled each folder by quarter and color-coded them by campaign type. 11 years of work distilled into 5 neat piles. Each number, each slide, each typo was evidence, not just of authorship, but of presence. I remembered something my old mentor once said. In corporate wars, documentation is both your shield and your sword. I never thought I'd need to use it. On Monday, I went back to the office as if nothing had changed. I greeted people, took notes, smiled when spoken to. But under the calm, every minute had purpose. I opened my patterns document and started cross-referencing it with HR policy manuals. Buried in Section 9B, Post-Leave Role Realignment, I found the line that made me pause. Any reassignment resulting in reduced pay, title, or scope within 12 months of return may constitute a breach of equitable employment standards. 12 months. I was at month 6. The line wasn't just policy, it was leverage. I printed it and slipped it into my notebook, between the screenshot of slide 17 and my pay stub from before maternity leave. 3 pieces of paper that, together, could tell a story. That week, I also noticed something else. Matthew had started preparing materials for the upcoming internal audit review, the one every department dreaded because it peeled back metrics. Ownership and leadership credit. It was scheduled for the end of the quarter, exactly 6 weeks away. I marked the date on my calendar and read. My approach was simple: visibility. If bias hides in silence, then light is the weapon. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse anyone. Instead, I started asking small strategic questions in public threads. Can you confirm the original source file for this model? Could we include prior year attribution for context? I believe the initial version was under my department's scope, happy to provide historical data if needed. Each message sounded helpful, professional, unthreatening. But everyone left a trail. Within 2 weeks, the patterns file had grown to 32 pages. My inbox had replies from people higher up, acknowledging my authorship in small, casual ways, each one a signature of truth. At night, after putting my son to sleep, I'd sit in the soft light of the kitchen adding notes. Sometimes I'd rock the bassinet with one hand and type with the other. It felt poetic, in a dark way, the rhythm of motherhood syncing with the rhythm of quiet revenge. By the 3rd week, I had everything organized. Each slide had metadata. Each email had a chain. Each thank you from a colleague was time-stamped. And the milk bottle, now permanently on my desk, had become my silent companion. No longer a reminder of softness, but of precision. It stood there like a clock, measuring time in ounces and patience. I began to prepare something I called the mirror deck. It was a clean, neutral version of the presentation Matthew had claimed, but with the original timestamps embedded in the footer of every slide. I added no commentary, no accusation, just the data. When you hold truth long enough, it begins to speak on its own. On a Friday evening, HR sent a memo. Departmental audits will include leadership contribution logs for verification. I almost laughed. Timing was perfect. Someone up there had decided fairness needed proof, and I already had mine. The following Monday, I requested a brief one-on-one with the audit coordinator, a quiet woman named Dana who had been at the company longer than me. I asked casual questions about documentation and process flow. She nodded, professional, then said softly, "You've been here 11 years, right? You'll be fine." The system remembers, I smiled. It remembers what we teach it to remember. After that meeting, I walked back to my desk, calm as a lake. The office buzzed around me, keyboards, chatter, the faint hum of air vents. No one noticed that I had just placed a series of invisible dominoes upright. That night, I stayed late, building the final version of the mirror deck. 57 slides. Every number accurate, every credit traceable. Slide 17 remained untouched. Timestamp, October 3rd, 2:17 a.m. I didn't need to explain that line to anyone. The data would do the talking. As the clock struck 11:04 p.m., I leaned back and looked at the milk bottle under the desk lamp. Its glass caught the light again, refracting into tiny fragments on the desk, white, gold, and faint blue from the monitor glow. For a second, the whole room looked underwater, like time itself was holding its breath. That's when I realized something simple but absolute. This wasn't about proving I was right. It was about proving the system could still recognize integrity if someone refused to disappear quietly. I saved the deck under a new name. Q Leadership Validation Final .ptx. Then I copied it into the shared audit folder, public access, time-stamped. No comment. No announcement. When I shut down my laptop, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt aligned, as if something invisible inside me had clicked back into place. Not victory yet, just readiness. On my way out, I passed the glass wall of the conference room, the same one I'd once watched through. My reflection moved across it, sharper now. The same woman, just steadier, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel smaller. I felt measured, exact. The morning of the audit review arrived quietly, no alarms, no tension in the air, just the same hum of the office coffee machine. The same sound of printers spitting out agendas that most people wouldn't read. I wore a plain gray blazer, the one I used for board presentations, and tied my hair back. I looked calm enough to disappear into the background, and that was the plan. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., conference room A. The glass walls had been polished overnight. You could almost see your reflection in the shine. On the long table, there were copies of quarterly reports stacked in color order. Someone had printed the slide deck. Q2 Leadership Sure Validation. final.pptx. My file. No one noticed that it wasn't Matthew who uploaded it to the shared drive. When the team filed in, I took a seat at the far end, one row behind the main line of chairs. Matthew stood at the front, the familiar, easy confidence in his tone. Morning, everyone. I'll be walking you through our performance audit and the frameworks that guided this quarter's growth. He opened the deck. Slide 1 appeared on the screen. Clean, minimal, the company logo on top. I felt my pulse steady. Dana, the audit coordinator, sat 2 seats away from me, her pen poised. She asked the first question almost immediately. Before we begin, could we confirm authorship of this model? The metadata lists 2 editors. Matthew smiled. Oh yes, I minor version control stuff. I refined the original framework, but the file was from an older repository. Happens all the time, she nodded. Sure. But just for accuracy, we'll need attribution history by slide, especially for leadership documentation. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before moving on. Of course, slide 3 appeared. It had the familiar chart, my chart, color-coded in the same gradient I had used since 2018. The corner tag read, Original Draft, Occ 3, 2:17 a.m. Dana squinted. That's a pretty precise timestamp, Matthew laughed lightly. Yes, I'm meticulous with revisions, but his voice cracked a little at meticulous. The next few slides rolled forward. The timestamps changed, all within the period I was on maternity leave. Each one was data that couldn't be argued with. Dana looked increasingly curious. I stayed still, hands folded on the table, saying nothing. When they reached slide 17, she paused. Can we go back one? Yes, this one. The source tag says, created by MS, October 3rd, 2:17 a.m. Who is MS? Matthew blinked. Must be a template artifact. Maybe an old internal version. Dana turned to the room. MS would be... Someone down the table spoke quietly. That's Mara. She was leading this framework before leave. The silence that followed felt physical. It filled the room like air turning solid. I didn't move. Dana wrote something in her notes. Noted. Then, almost kindly, thank you, Mara, for keeping such organized metadata. The rest of the presentation unraveled slowly, not dramatically, just fact by fact, slide by slide like gravity doing its work. The data spoke louder than any confrontation could. Every audit question pulled another thread. Campaign owner IDs, internal approval logs, revision histories. Every line pointed back to me. By the end of the session, Matthew's voice had lost its volume. He flipped through the final slides faster than usual, skipping details he once performed with pride. When he reached the end, Dana closed her notebook gently. This has been helpful, she said. We'll be following up with leadership attribution adjustments. No one looked directly at me, but I felt the shift, a quiet current passing through the room. The kind that happens when people suddenly remember fairness has a memory. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped softly against the floor. Dana approached as others filed out. She said in a low voice, You document beautifully. Most people don't. Old habit, I replied. She smiled, just enough to say she understood more than she could comment on. Matthew lingered at the far side of the room, pretending to check his phone. His face was pale, his tie slightly loosened. For the first time in months, he looked unsure of where to stand. I gathered my notebook and the printed report, the milk bottle tucked quietly in my bag beside it. As I walked out, I caught my reflection on the glass wall again, faint but upright. Outside, the office noise returned, phones ringing, printers humming, the ordinary soundtrack of business as usual. But something had shifted underneath it, an almost imperceptible alignment, like the building itself had exhaled. At my desk, I opened my inbox. A new message from HR waited at the top. Subject, Follow-up on leadership attribution, audit findings pending review. I read it once, then minimized the window. I didn't need confirmation. I'd already seen the truth surface. The milk bottle sat on the corner of my desk, the light hitting it like a prism. I touched it lightly, a gesture of thanks, not sentiment, because that bottle, more than anything, had taught me what the office had forgotten. Precision is patience in motion. And patience, once measured, never stays silent for long. 2 days after the audit, I walked into the office and felt something invisible had changed. Not the temperature, not the noise, the tone. Conversations dropped a little when I passed. People looked longer than they used to, their smiles slower, more deliberate. There was a new meeting on my calendar, HR plus legal review, leadership attribution, required. No sender name, just system generated. It was set for 2 p.m. At 1:58, I entered the same glass room where it all began. The table was half full, HR, legal, and Dana from audit. A cup of untouched coffee sat near the center like a prop. The blinds were half closed, the light thin and even. Dana spoke first. "We've completed the review of Q2 documentation." She looked down at her papers, then back at me. "The audit confirms authorship inconsistencies in the growth framework materials. All source data point to your original work?" I nodded once. No surprise, no triumph. Just acknowledgement, HR continued. "Effective immediately, your prior title, Strategy Manager, is reinstated with backdated compensation adjustment. Additionally, the board has requested you lead a short-term initiative reviewing maternity return policies for fairness compliance." For a moment, I didn't speak. The words floated there, balanced perfectly between justice and irony. I thought of the nights I'd stayed awake, the slow patience of typing reports while the rest of the house slept, the quiet precision it took to let silence build into proof. Finally, I said, "Thank you. I'll make sure the next version of that policy can't be misunderstood." Dana smiled faintly. HR nodded, professional but awkward, as if fairness still felt like a new language in their mouths. When I stepped out of the room, the hallway seemed wider than it used to. The fluorescent light wasn't any softer, but it no longer felt cold. At my desk, I found an email waiting. Internal acknowledgement update. "Thank you, Mara, for your contributions to the growth framework. Your documentation standards have set a new benchmark for internal reporting." It wasn't an apology, but it was something better. Recognition written in the language they respected. Metrics. Across the floor, Matthew avoided my eyes. He walked past my desk without a word, carrying a folder too thin to matter. His posture had changed, quieter now, a little heavier. I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened a new document, Fair Return Policy, Draft 1. The first line I typed was simple. Never assume absence means incompetence. Then another, maternity is not a pause. It's a parallel process. I stopped, reread the lines, then saved the file. It felt like building something new out of silence. Something that might last longer than a single project or a single bias. The afternoon sun hit my desk, lighting up the milk bottle again. The glass was spotless, empty, catching every shard of light that touched it. I thought of how that bottle had been mistaken for weakness, how many times people had looked at it and seen fragility instead of focus. But it had been my anchor all along. When Dana passed by later, she tapped my desk lightly. "They'll announce the new policy task force next week," she said. "You'll be chairing it," I smiled, quiet but certain. "Good. It's time fairness had a proper framework." She paused, then said softly, "You handled this beautifully." I looked at the bottle again. It's all about pacing. That evening, as the office emptied, I stayed a few minutes longer. No victory speech, no music swelling, just me, my desk, and the slow hum of balance restored. When I finally packed my bag, the milk bottle went last. It wasn't a symbol of motherhood anymore. It was proof of method. And as I walked past the same glass wall one more time, my reflection wasn't the same woman who had once watched from outside. This time, I was on the inside, and the wall was clear. 3 days after the announcement, the office returned to its usual rhythm, or tried to. The hum of the air vents, the chatter in the hallway, the coffee smell. Everything was the same, except now people spoke a little softer when I passed, like the air had learned restraint. That morning, I arrived early. The floor was still half dark, the computers asleep. I placed the milk bottle on my desk, empty, polished, standing under the thin light from the window. The reflection stretched long across the surface, like a line drawn from what I'd endured to what I'd earned. At 9, Matthew appeared by my desk. His steps were slower than usual, his confidence dulled around the edges. He held a file, maybe for show, maybe as a shield. "Morning," he said quietly. I looked up. "Morning." He shifted his weight, the silence between us steady and exact. I wanted to say, "I didn't mean for things to go that way." I waited. "Silence can do more work than a question ever could," he went on, words breaking apart under the weight of his own discomfort. "You know how things move fast here. Sometimes credit gets misplaced?" I finished for him. He nodded, half relieved, half ashamed. "Yeah, I guess I just forgot who built the foundation," I said, my tone flat but calm. "It happens. People get eager to climb floors they didn't design." He tried to smile, but it faltered. "Guess you won this one." I leaned back in my chair, eyes steady on his. "No," I said softly. "I didn't win anything. I just kept working while you stopped noticing." The sentence hung there, light, simple, final. He looked down, exhaled, and nodded once before walking away. No excuses, no fight, just quiet exit. The clean kind that leaves dignity on the table for whoever still wants to pick it up. When he disappeared into the hallway, I turned my chair toward the window. The city outside was humming with its own noise. Cabs, lights, movement, a reminder that the world doesn't pause for anyone's small injustice. But sometimes, if you wait long enough, the scales tilt back on their own. I opened the new policy draft on my screen, the one I'd been writing since the reinstatement. The first page glowed pale blue under the morning light. At the top, I typed a new line. "Fairness is not granted." It's recorded. Then I saved the file, closed the window, and picked up the milk bottle. The glass felt warm from the sun, heavier than it looked, like it had absorbed every quiet second I'd spent waiting for justice to grow its spine again. As I stood to leave for the leadership briefing, I caught my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor. Same eyes, same calm expression, but steadier now. There was no anger left, just precision. I placed the bottle back on the desk, perfectly centered, and said under my breath, "Sometimes, the cleanest revenge is letting truth do the talking." Then I walked out, and the office, finally, felt balanced. That evening, the office was almost empty. The sun had dropped low, painting the walls in gold and gray. My desk was quiet again. No reports, no messages waiting, just the milk bottle standing in the last beam of light. I picked it up, turned it slowly in my hand. For months it had carried patience, endurance, proof. Now it was just glass again, transparent, ordinary, and whole. I placed it back down, perfectly centered, and let my hand rest there for a moment. The room hummed with that soft after-silence that follows balance restored. If you've ever come back to a room that forgot your name and had to remind it gently, you know this feeling. The small, steady kind of victory that doesn't need applause, because fairness doesn't shout. It stays. And when it finally returns, it doesn't bring noise. It brings light, like the one shining on that empty bottle now. If you've ever faced something like this, tell me your story in the comments. I read every one. Because every quiet story of fairness deserves to be heard. Like the video. And subscribe to Office Revenge Files for more stories where women turn silence into power.